What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Seth Rzuski podcast. Today in the house, I'm honored to have my co-host, Rich Little. Rich, good to see you.
Good morning, Seth. Here we are. It's Saturday morning. It's a beautiful Saturday morning, Labor Day weekend. And today we're going to be talking about as promised, the Isabella Gardner Museum heist.
Absolutely. And we'll be joined with a very special guest towards the halfway point or tail end of this episode. So make sure you stay tuned. He has already been on the show, and he'll be returning to discuss his beliefs on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist that occurred in 1990 in Boston, Massachusetts. Very first thing before we start, I do want to shout out Amber Day, 1946, on the YouTube for dropping a super chat last week and dropping some really nice and heartfelt comments. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we appreciate your support. And while I'm on the topic of super chats, all the super chats that are going to be on this particular episode, I'm going to gather up and I'm going to donate to the Annunciation school shooting that happened in Minneapolis. I'm going to donate it to the families and to any nonprofits that are going to be helping assist in any type of funeral costs. So if you would like to donate for a good cause and show your appreciation for the podcast, we'd really appreciate it. And all the receipts will be posted on my Instagram and my X account, so you can follow really where and what the donations went to on my Instagram and my X account. Links will be in the description and pinned comment. So with that,
I'd like to say thank you to one of our colleagues over at Rockland High School, and that's Rich Gattine. And he's watching today from the Sallyport, and I wanted to say good morning to Rich Gattine and to anybody who is with Rich Gattine. This is an interesting case. He and I did some chatting about it, and so let's get right into it.
Let's just dive right on into this.
So the Isabella Gardner Museum is a smaller museum in Boston, and it's located in the Fens-Kenmore area. So if you want to get there, the easiest way is by public transportation. Take the Green Line. Make sure you take the E branch. If you're not, you're going to be headed out towards Boston College. But take the E branch, and that takes you out Huntington Ave, Northeastern, Museum of Fine Arts, Wentworth Institute, Simmons College is in that area. So it's not in downtown Boston, but a little bit outside. It's in the Fens-Kenmore area, and Fens, yes, Fenway Park, that area. So that's where the Isabella Gardner Museum is. It was founded by Isabella Stewart Gardner. And she is from the New York area. And she was from a wealthy family, and she married her husband, who was, she was 20 when she got married, and he was 23. And he was from a wealthy, what they call the Boston Brahmins. They controlled a lot of business in Boston, and he was part of that family that was involved in textiles and things like that. And so they had a wealthy family, the two of them. They had one child, and unfortunately he died of pneumonia, as is often the case back in those days. We talked about this on the Lizzie Borden case, how children died of things today that are preventable. And they kind of adopted a nephew, and it was Mr. Gardner's brother's son, and they kind of brought him up, Joe. And he went on to Harvard, went out to the Pacific on some studies, contracted malaria, and he passed away at age 20.
Sure.
And it was at that time that Isabella Gardner started getting into other interests.
Sure. Like
and
art and
her
collectibles.
artwork became almost her children.
Right.
And she started collecting, especially European art, Rembrandt, Vermeer, people like that, and started putting together a collection. And it wasn't until 1903 that she decided she wanted to build a special place to house her collection that could continue after her passing. So she built this place called the Palace, and it's located on Evans Way. So if you wanted to get there, the E branch on the Green Line, get off at the Mass Fine Arts stop, and walk west on Huntington Ave to the next set of lights, turn right on Louis Pasteur, and it's only about a 5 to 7 minute walk from that T stop. You can also drive there. Simmons College has a parking garage, and that's not too far away. So getting to the collection. The collection contained works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Titian, Botticelli, Raphael, Degas, Manet. So all of the famous European artists of the 16th, 17th century, this was her forte, and this is what she liked. She also had other things, and stonework and other artwork brought to her palace in the Fens area. And the museum was started and finally opened to the public right after the turn of the century, about 1906. So
she opened that during her
lifetime.
Yeah, her lifetime.
She died there.
She died in 1925 or something.
Right, 24, and she actually lived on the 4th floor. She had her apartment on the 4th floor of that museum complex. Now, after her passing, she set up an endowment to keep the museum going and to keep the collection going. And she was very specific about how the collection should be displayed, as you have here today.
Yeah, so these paintings are my paintings. I did not steal them from the museum.
And you didn't paint them either.
I did not paint them. No. These paintings can be attributed to a good friend of mine. His name's David Karowski. He has a shop on Etsy. I've purchased now 4 paintings from him. My father's bought 2. So, and him and I were talking. I'm looking to buy 3 more, and I have a custom piece already in the work right now. I'm an art guy as well. I like looking at it. So if you are liking these paintings, his links to his Instagram and to his Etsy shop will be in the description below. Amazing customer service and amazing shipping too. And he offers some really good high quality artwork, and I love having it in my dining room.
That's good coffee.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Coffeebyseth.com if you want to support the brand. Coffeebyseth.com. You can buy all of your coffee down there in those links. That stuff will all be in the description as well. The Art Heist.
So here we are. The museum's open. Isabella Gardner Museum is there. Sure. She lives at the location on the 4th floor in an apartment. Passes away 1924.
Yep.
The collection is there. The museum is open to the public. And fast forward to 1990.
Yeah.
It's a long weekend, Seth.
Yeah, St. Patrick's Day. It's a long weekend for many people, and long weekend through hangovers.
In Boston.
Actually, here's a fun fact. Do you know where the term hangover comes from?
No.
Okay, here's a fun fact for everybody.
Where does the term hangover come from, Seth?
Here's a good one. So if you're hungover, that refers to actually hanging over. And what I mean by that is in the, I want to say the 1940s or 50s, maybe, honestly, I forget the date. It's been a while. It's been a while since I was in school and I was told this, but at some point in recent history, establishments who served alcohol would also supply rooming. And if you couldn't afford a room, what you would do is the best way to sleep would be to hang over a rope that they would display amongst the bar or the cabins that you'd rent out for the night. And people preferred to hang over a rope until they woke up because it was more comfortable than sleeping on the floor with the rats and the mice because, not sanitary back in, the 1920s, 30s, 40s, or whatever it was. If you have the proper date, please let me know because I do forget.
That was when I was born. I'm sorry. I don't remember seeing the rope.
But that's what I was told is that's where it comes from, the hangover.
Well,
so you'd hang over a rope. So I was hungover.
You're going to be sure that our watchers are going to let you know.
They're going to rip me apart.
If
it's
that
okay.
is not correct. and you'll be hung over a chamber pot like they were before.
If you guys really got a bone to pick with me, throw it in a super chat so we
Yes.
can donate to a good cause. But yeah, so St. Patrick's Day, a lot of people are hungover. What's going on? 1990.
In addition to St. Patrick's Day, the 17th of March is a holiday, or was a holiday in Suffolk County at that time.
Okay.
Evacuation Day. That's the day that the British left Boston and headed out towards Nova Scotia. And it was a legal holiday in Suffolk County. As a former teacher in the Boston Public Schools, we loved that because it was the only day off in March, and March is a long month. And can be cold, it can be rainy, it can be wet, it can be snowy, it can be all of those things, and a day off in the middle of the month was welcome. The only other problem was the other illegal holiday that had been thrown in there was Bunker Hill Day, and that was in June, and that often extended our school year. So Evacuation Day is the 17th, which coincides with St. Patrick's Day. So that was a Saturday. Sunday was the day, the 18th, that was the day of the crime, was the St. Patrick's Day Parade in South Boston, or as we call it, Southie. And then Monday was the celebration of Evacuation Day. So all the schools, all the Suffolk County, Boston, and that area, that was a holiday on Monday to celebrate Evacuation Day. So the schools were closed on Monday, and public workers in the Suffolk County did not have to work on Monday. So it was a long weekend for everybody.
Sure.
And the weather was dismal, not cold. There was a hint of spring. It had been up in the 50s, but that night it was dank. It was foggy. It was the perfect night for the perfect crime.
Right.
So
Under the stealth of darkness.
yes. So on the 18th, this is early morning, 18th, two gentlemen came to the side door of the Isabella Gardner Museum and rang the bell. And there were two security guards on duty. And one of them and I'm going to get my notes here just so I don't mispronounce anybody's name. And one of them's name was Rick Hestan, and he came on duty right around midnight, and there was a Richard Abath, and both of them had a musical background. One was taking courses at Berkeley. The report saw that he did not graduate. That was Rick Abath. And then the other one, who was Randy Hestan, went to the New England Conservatory of Music. He was interested in classical music, whereas Abath was in a rock band.
Sure.
So these two guys this is a part-time gig for them, being a security guard at the Isabella Gardner Museum. And what they would do is periodically during the night make the rounds throughout the premises. There were motion detectors that noted it. So we got a pretty good idea what was going on. And there was also all kinds of video. Back then it was videotape, recording the galleries throughout the complex. So at approximately just after 1 a.m., the bell rang at the guard desk, and they were an enclosed guard desk, like a kiosk.
Sure.
And there was a button in there for them to press, which went directly to the Boston PD.
Just a panic button.
A panic button, right? And that sounds similar to what we have in schools today, but that's what they had back in 1990.
Right.
So there's an intercom, and Mr. Abarth says, "Can I help you?" And they said, "Boston PD. We had a call for a disturbance." Now the protocol was, you don't let anybody in.
Right.
Anybody. When the museum is closed, you do not let anyone in.
And to mention, these guards were dressed like in real uniforms. They had badges, they had the pins and everything. They looked legit. So I'm not taking that away from the security guards.
Rick Abath couldn't see them. He could only hear them because they were on intercom. So he hit the button to unlock the door and let them in. So he's in a controlled room, and they're on the outside. And so what his point was, and what he told the FBI, they said they thought they saw me on a warrant, and they wanted me to come out so they could get a better look at me. And big mistake, because he left his only connection to the outside world, the panic button.
Yeah.
Came outside, they said, "You're under arrest," handcuffed him. And about that time, the second security guard, Randy, he was doing the rounds and came back, and they handcuffed him and told them, "This is a robbery."
Yeah.
Took them to the basement, duct taped them, and there they sat until the following morning, when the next change of shift came in on the security guards. So the individuals, two individuals, went through the museum, started on the second floor, came down to the first floor. They were in the building 81 minutes, which is
That's a long time.
A long time for an art heist.
During a crime, if you're in there for 3 minutes, that feels like 10 hours. You know, you want to get in and out. So 81 minutes shows confidence. It shows that they were sure of what they were doing. They had potentially scoped out the building for the following days to know when, who was coming in, out, all that stuff. So it shows confidence in that.
Well,
these guys
they knew the security system.
Yeah,
they knew the routine. They knew the routine of the guards, security personnel, and they went from there and took 13 objects, most of them on the smaller side, this size.
Right, yeah. There was stuff that they could fit in their pocket, too, like the size of stamps.
Yeah, there was a finial that came off of a flagpole, a Napoleonic flagpole, which was only about 9 inches tall, and they took that. They took a Chinese goblet called a Gu, and which is kind of out of context with the other things that they stole. They took two large paintings, oil on canvas, both by Rembrandt. One titled Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, Jesus in a Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and the other was A Lady and Gentleman in White and Black. And those were the large paintings, like 5 feet by 4 feet. And they cut them right out of the frames that they were in with like a box cutter.
Do you suspect that they rolled the paintings?
I would suspect that to get them out of there, they'd roll them up, probably together.
Yeah.
And maybe put a rubber band around them.
Sure.
Maybe they put those other things, those other smaller ones, because there were 13 objects stolen together. 11 of them were artworks, were paintings, etchings, things like that. And the other 2 were bronze objects. And so here we are, and 81 minutes and out the door, and we've been looking for them ever since.
Pretty much. Now, that's the basically the extent of the crime. And you know what? In my research, I'd even heard that there were objects that weren't of insane amount of value. Like I'm talking like a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there, not the $100 million artworks that they stolen. So there were some smaller ones too that people hadn't even noticed until 2 or 3 days later that were displayed higher up in a different area. And then someone was like, "Hey, that's gone. I didn't realize that that's gone too."
Right.
So I had heard that was something that was kind of going on with this case.
The interesting things about it, they kind of got, they equated fame, a famous painting, with value.
Right.
And that's not always the case. And the more famous a piece of artwork is, the more difficult it's going to be to have to get rid of it. You just can't go to a flea market and put these on the table and say, "Would you like to buy this?"
Right.
And so what they bought was what they stole was something that was difficult to steal, difficult to sell, difficult to market, and that's why it's believed now that either the objects are destroyed or they're still hidden somewhere.
Well, you can't burn metal statues, and there were metal statues.
You can't burn a goblet. You could melt it down, but that would be a project in itself. Probably the best thing to do on both of those would have been to bury them if you wanted to get rid of them.
Right.
So here we are, and now we come to the conclusion or to the theory, who did it?
So we have a list of suspects.
Yes.
Do we want to go over the suspects?
Yeah, and I have my theory on who I think is responsible. And I know that Eric has his theory on who thinks is responsible.
Yeah, so if you guys stay, we do have Eric Ulis coming back in. He is an expert on this case as well as the D.B. Cooper case. If you watched the last week's episode, you can catch his interview there. I also posted yesterday morning just the Eric Ulis and Darren Schaefer interview yesterday morning at like 9:30 and 10 o'clock.
I saw that. That was interesting.
So you guys can check out just the interviews, or if you want to watch the full podcast, you can watch it there. And we are live right now, so if you guys do have questions, feel free to throw them down below. So we are live. This is uncut.
Yes. Rich Katine, if you have any questions, we're here.
I have the chat pulled up down here by my feet. So what's that? Yeah, we do have a couple messages. Let's see. Let's see what we got while we're
sure.
Kind of just. Alrighty. The rope thing was 18th, 19th century London. So I knew I had the date wrong. It sounded too good to be true if it was in the 20th century. And I learned about that from looking into the Jack the Ripper history. And that's from Pond Pop and Dan. We saw him in the chat last week.
Yeah.
So Dan, it's good to see you. Thank you for tuning back in. We appreciate hanging out with us. I love it when the viewers drop comments. It really makes it a much more personal episode.
Right.
I love hearing from you guys. Caroline, what's that on the laptop that we got Eric zooming in on? Is that anything? What's that say up at the top? Okay, we're good then. Alrighty, back to it.
Okay, so
we're live, guys. We're live. So back to it.
There's several theories. One is that organized crime in Boston, which was really active at that time, but in disarray,
right,
could have been possible for this. And what would they want to do this for? Well, they used the artwork for leverage, either amongst themselves or with the law.
Right. Yeah, because if you know you're gonna do a 10-year bid at Walpole,
yes,
but you can get credit for returning a different piece from an unsolved crime that will, grant you immunity.
And wind up at Plymouth, which is a much easier gig.
Yeah, exactly. If you can sort of, wheel and deal your way through prison, but it's an interesting economy. I'll put it that way. So that's kind of what they were trying to do.
That would have been one of the reasons for stealing it. Another would be to steal it for profit, for ransom.
Right.
To put a ransom, and there's a reward on this art even today, 30 some odd years later, 35 years later.
What's the reward?
10 million.
Don't fake it, guys. The FBI is involved with this.
So if you,
David, I know what you're thinking.
if you have any knowledge, if you've seen any of these, there's still a large, sizable reward from the Gardner Museum for the return or information concerning the return of those items. So the top, Lawyers Monthly, which is a publication at the time, or later on towards 2000, came out with a probability chart of who they thought. And the number one chart, 40%, was the Boston Mafia organized crime syndicate. Mm-hmm. Number two, which came in 25%, was they thought that Rick Abath, the security guard on duty, had something to do with it. And that's often the case in many of these art cases, that these art heists, that somebody on the inside can be very, very helpful to somebody on the outside who wants to pull a heist and steal some artwork.
Sure.
There was the Corsillian mob, which is only a 10%, 15% probability. Miles Connor, his name come up. And I've heard this name for years, Miles Connor. Interesting individual from around here like you and I. His father was a police officer. Stepbrother was a state police officer. Other brother was a police officer in Marshfield.
Right.
Who later became a priest. And to my understanding, still is. And so Miles didn't go that route.
Right.
Miles had a band. And it is said that he was the opening act for both Roy Orbison, who was big back in the 1960 era, and Chuck Berry, that Miles and his group were the opening act for both Orbison and Chuck Berry. So he had a musical background and had some success in that, but he also liked artwork. And he had previously stolen a Rembrandt from the Isabella Gardner Museum back about 15 years before.
Sure.
Used that piece of artwork as a get out of jail.
Yeah, get out of jail free card. Or painting.
Exactly.
I need that in my next Monopoly game.
He also was known to have stolen something from the Museum of Fine Arts, which is over in Huntington Ave, not too far from the Isabella Gardner Museum. And he also stole something from the Fogg Museum at Harvard, piece of artwork from there. So he was a noted art heister. He concentrated on art. He also had a robbery he's attributed to out in Pennsylvania at somebody's gallery that he stole things. So he's kind of he's out there, but he's got an alibi. And his alibi is that he's in jail in Illinois.
That's a pretty solid alibi.
On the night of the 18th of March, 1990. So, but his fingerprints are all over this plan. So it's almost like he planned it and somebody else did it. Now, we do know that there was a wise guy by the name of Bobby Donati, and Bobby Donati visited Miles out in Illinois in the months before. Mm-hmm. So there's a connection that maybe Bobby Donati, Donalti, Donalti, that he may have been partially responsible for this. And another name attributed to Bobby is a guy by the name of David Houghton. I think David Houghton might be involved in the planning of this thing, but David Houghton was, number one, depending on where you get your source, he was 52 years old when he passed away, within 2 years after the heist. Or he was 36, depending on the sources that you read. But the rumor is that I read that he weighed 350 pounds, and it seems like a 350-pound police officer would have been noticed by the two guards at the Gardner Museum that they tied up and put in the cellar. And also a 350-pound person, and he had a noted heart condition, which they attributed to his death. Probably stealing artwork off of the walls at the Gardner Museum at 2 o'clock in the morning is probably not good for your heart. So I kind of don't think that he was involved, but somebody was. If Bobby Donelli was involved, then somebody else had to help because there were two police officers. A name that I think that Eric is going to bring up is Brian McDivitt, who was a con artist and a filmmaker and wrote screenplays, and he will tell you about that story. So I think personally that there was an inside connection, an inside job. I don't think it was Randy. It could have been Rick Abath. Maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it was somebody else on security that tipped these people off on where people would be and et cetera.
Yeah, because I'd heard something about like a security closet that the guards knew to go into to, tamper with things.
Well, they destroyed the videotapes.
Yeah, exactly, and they ripped out the motion reports as well.
Right.
Because there were motion detectors. Now I'm not talking like laser beam motion detectors that you got to do backflips and front flips to get through and all these crazy things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking just like pressure plates type of stuff.
And there was some of that because it was documented out on hard copy back at that time. It was when you had an intrusion into a room, it was printed out. And there is a document that shows that somebody was in the upstairs Dutch room where the Rembrandts were taken and the time.
Right.
And there were, and I saw a copy of the document that was printed out, looked like teletype. Printed out on a dot matrix printer. Remember those that told that somebody was in motion detector in the Dutch room.
Sure. Now, I do just want to bring up that the thieves took the original reports, but they didn't realize that it was being copied to a hard drive, and that's how we have this information. Right. The motion information is because they took. Well, they didn't take the hard drive, but there was a backup there.
But they destroyed the videotape.
Yep.
Because they had video, and this, not to go back, but 1 minute before Rick Abath was asked to open the door, he opened that security door, and because they saw that on tape. And they don't know if the FBI thought that was extremely suspicious. Who knows? Maybe just need a breath of fresh air. Maybe he was tossing a butt out onto the pavement.
Could have been a signal, hit the flashlight.
Could have been a coincidence.
It could have been nothing.
Right.
We just don't know.
But they do know that door opened a minute before the buzzer hit, and these two police officers were buzzed in.
Now, what he says about that, from what I heard, is that was just part of his rounds. He made sure that door was shut, which was against proper protocol. And he says that he used to do this all the time.
Right. There is also indication and on video that he allowed somebody into the premises on the night before.
Oh, really?
And his claim was he didn't remember.
Yeah.
Doesn't recall that happening at all. Yet they have it on videotape that somebody entered. They don't know who it is. They were allowed to come into the museum, and this is totally against protocols. And he had done some other things that were against protocol by allowing people in while he was there.
Yeah.
Which is completely against the rules, but he did it anyways. So the interesting part about it is all these cast of characters, whether it be Carmelo Martino, Carm, George Ricefella, Leonard Demuzio, Robert Unk Garante. I love these nicknames. Unk. Bob the Cook Gentile, Anthony Romano, and Anthony Fat Boy Russo.
Fat Tony.
Fat Tony, I'm sorry.
There we go.
Fat Tony Russo.
What a nickname, man.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
And they were all in organized crime in Boston, commonly referred to back then as the Mafia.
Right.
So many of these people died within a short time of the Gardner Museum heist, within 2 years, under strange circumstances. As I mentioned before, I mentioned Bobby Donali, and he's a suspect, and he was found, he was in his car, his Cadillac in Revere, but he was in the trunk. And that was within within a year of the Gardner Museum heist.
Yeah, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Right. And then commonly referred to as his associate was the gentleman that I mentioned before that was 350 pounds. He died in 1992, supposedly of natural causes, yet there was no autopsy done. Under today's protocols, probably because of his age of 52, unattended death, they probably would have done an autopsy. That seems to be what happens in Massachusetts now. If you have an unattended death, anything unattended death goes to the state police, right. And an autopsy is almost automatic.
Right.
Especially if it's unattended in an area not in a home or outside or something like that, that they do an autopsy. So George Rostella, he passed away of a drug overdose a year afterwards. Both he and Linda DiMuzio died in 1991, within a year after the heist. So DiMuzio was murdered by somebody, was shot by somebody. So all of these cast of characters passed away. Many of the cast of characters passed away. We've had leads. The FBI has changed their opinion of who they thought was responsible several times, and the timeline goes. First of all, they focused on Miles Connor, and I think Miles Connor. He says that Donati visited him while he was in prison months before, and they discussed an art heist. Then that was between 1990 and 94. That's what the FBI's position was. It changed in 96 to 2000, and then they thought that Restfelder and DiNuzio and Garante, they were involved in it. And then from 2001 to 2010, they thought Bob Gentile was involved as receiving stolen artwork. And from then on, 2011 up to now, the general focus has been on the Merlino crew that pulled off with the suspects of Gentile and Garanti tied to moving the artwork. It was reported in the early 2000s that it was in a place down in Connecticut. The FBI investigated that, dug up the floor of a garage and things like that, and nothing was found. So we've had no indication that any of this artwork is out there. My personal belief is that it was either orchestrated or planned or suggested by Miles Connor, because that's what Miles did.
Do you think it's possible that a foreign country came in and
No.
stole the, do you think it's possible that, I'm not picking a fight with anybody, I just want to say that right now, but do you think it's possible that Putin was like, I want those paintings, go get them? Like something to that extent. I'm not saying him particularly.
No, I don't think that they didn't take the most valuable paintings there.
Right. So was this a shopping cart list, or was this just
it could have been? It could have been, but it might have been the smaller ones. Might have been just a theft of convenience. They know they entered the building. They tied up the guards. The first place they went was the Dutch room on the second floor. So they didn't just willy-nilly start grabbing things. They went upstairs to the Dutch room and stole the two Rembrandts and moved on from there. There's an interesting one about a Manet being stolen from the Blue Room, which is on the first floor. And there's no motion detector knowledge that they ever went in the Blue Room. The only one that went in...
There's a missing painting, though.
Right, but the only person that they know that went in that room during the evening of the 19th and the 17th and 18th was Rick Abath,
The security guard.
the security guard. On his rounds,
So there's
he
a
went through
painting
the
missing. Those thieves didn't go in there, but Rick was in there. Rick will also open the door. It's very,
right.
I don't know.
Could have taken it out, had it for them. They did not have motion detectors on the paintings, as I'm sure yours have security on them.
Yes, yeah. You try to break into my house.
Now, in today's day and age, all of those paintings, valuable paintings, anywhere in any museum has got some type of marker on it and that's easy to do, to tell where it is, to tell if it's been moved, to tell where it's going. It's there. And that's the way to do it now. And you can do that and track it by computer. And but back in 1990, things were much less sophisticated. The Isabella Gardner Museum was in the transition field of updating their security system. And that might have had a lot to do with the timing on when this was done, because I think these people knew that they were updating their system, that it was going to be more difficult to, as technology improved, it was going to be more difficult to get away with something because there's going to be more detection.
Absolutely. And I'm getting word in that our friend Eric has joined the Zoom call.
Great.
Eric, how we doing today? Oh, headphones.
Yep.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
1 second. There we go.
Morning, Eric.
How we doing?
Hey, good morning, guys. How you doing?
We're doing pretty good. So we just went through the Gardner Museum. We went through a list of suspects and really just kind of outlined the basic details of the case. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience who might not have watched the DB Cooper special we did last week?
Sure, yeah. I'm somebody who, first of all, the name's Eric Ulis, of course. And check out my YouTube channel, folks.
I will.
Ulis.
All that stuff will be linked below. Be linked below.
Just check that out, because there's a lot of cool stuff there related to all this stuff. But yeah, I'm a guy who's really has dived deep into some of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. And I'm primarily known for my, my work on the DB Cooper case, which is an unsolved skyjacking that took place in 1971. And I've headlined a show on History Channel related to that. I've been on part of a Netflix show, been on Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates, a number of other shows, as well as been in the media pretty extensively related to all of this stuff, everything from Jake Tapper at CNN to, CNBC, News Nation, Fox News, all that good stuff. But one of the cases that's of particular interest to me, it's been of interest of mine for several years, is the Gardner Museum heist. And the really cool thing about the Gardner Museum heist, in addition to the fact that it's unsolved, of course, is there's a $10 million reward for this stuff if it's found today.
That sounds nice. I could use that right now.
I think all of us could use $10 million right now, or even a portion of that there. But the point of the matter is that, what attracts me to cases like that is you have an enormous award, of course, that's out there, which obviously, has generated interest from a lot of people. And therefore you would think that there would be some cracks somewhere along the way. Somebody would rat somebody else out, but that hasn't happened in 35 years now. And of course, this thing is real. This really happened. This isn't, Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster or whatever. And the other cool thing about this is that we know a lot. There are actually a lot of pieces to the puzzle here. It's not like somebody just showed up and the artwork's gone and you literally have nothing to work with. I mean, there's a hell of a story that's tied in with this, starting with when obviously the thieves were led into the museum by Rick Abath. So, and it just kind of goes on and on from there. But I also think the one other cool really aspect or element of this is the FBI. It's sort of the relationship between the FBI, in particular Jeff Kelly originally, who's no longer the lead agent there in Boston heading this thing up, but also Anthony Amore at the Gardner Museum. The relationship between these two and just sort of this hoarding of information related to the case. In other words, not releasing anything or very little to the public is also an interesting and fascinating dynamic there. And I'll say, I'm not sure if I said this on the previous podcast, but one of the things that I've said is that mysteries are mysteries for a reason. Invariably, someone missed something somewhere, somehow, at some time. And when you're talking about the Gardner Museum heist, there are many examples of things that I believe that the authorities have done wrong and continue to do wrong. They continue to trip over their feet. They continue to make mistakes. They even cover up to a certain degree. And I think that the net effect of all of this is that it's unsolved as it is today. But having said all that, I do think that I believe that the guy is actually known. I think that not by the FBI, but I do believe that we know who he was or how this thing went down. It's just a matter of getting the FBI to basically get off their ass and take this a little more seriously and drill down into it.
You know, a constant theme that Rich and I have discussed on this show is preservation of evidence. It seems like from Lizzie Borden to the Black Dahlia to D.B. Cooper to the Gardner heist to Lee Harvey Oswald to Chappaquiddick, everything that we discuss, preservation of evidence is always at fault. How did that affect the Gardner Museum? Like, was there something in particular that we really needed that wasn't there? Now, obviously, the obvious answer is the security tapes, and they took that. But was there something that, you know, could have easily been, you know, preserved that just wasn't?
Well, let me put it this way, and I'll kind of revert back to the D.B. Cooper case for a second here. The D.B. Cooper case went unsolved for 45 years before they shut it down. In other words, it occurred in 71. They shut it down in 2016. But at the same time, 2016, shortly thereafter, through a Freedom of Information Act request, the FBI started dumping about 400 or 500 pages of FBI files into the public in tranches that occurred about every 6 weeks, and they continue to this very day. So we have something in the 40,000 pages, something around 40,000 pages of FBI files related to the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. Now, a lot of the names and so forth are redacted, but there's still a lot of very important critical information in those files. I would argue that right there, that single act of opening up those files and slowly but surely dripping them out to the public has enabled us, since the case closed in 2016, has enabled us to actually move the ball further down the field and get closer to solving the mystery than the 45 years preceding them closing the case. In the case of Gardner, it's been 35 years. It's been over a third of a century. You've got 13 masterpieces missing, or 13 pieces of art missing. They're not all really masterpieces, but there are a handful that certainly are. In today's number, worth $500 million to $1 billion. And at some point, you would think that these guys would say, it's been 35 years, what we're doing isn't working. It hasn't worked. We have no idea where the hell any of this stuff is. Let's think outside the box. Let's open this up to the public, and let's see what can come out. At a minimum, you're going to get an enormous amount of interest, publicity, probably follow-on documentaries, things of that nature. And you just never know what can come from that, especially 35 years out. If you're not going to do it after 35 years, more than a third of a century, when the hell are you going to do it? So I think that we don't know what we don't know. So in the case of the files, who the hell knows what's really buried in there? I mean, we've managed to pull together a few things and ascertain a few things, pieces of data there. And actually, I think it tells a pretty big story. But to be sure, there are going to be a lot of other things in there, and a lot of other people, and a lot of other theories that they fleshed out that they haven't revealed. I mean, officially, the FBI hasn't even revealed who they think actually pulled it off. Right. Leonard DiMuzio and George Reisfelder. I mean, in 2013, Jeff Kelly and Anthony Amore and a few other people went out there and proclaimed that they knew, who stole the artwork and everything else. They just didn't know where the hell it was. Well, that was 2013. 2013, I mean, it's 2025. It's 12 years later, and nothing has come of it, not even a name. Now, we know, again, through a series of other court cases and things of this nature, that some of that information is sort of dripped out. But that's just, honestly, it's just horseshit. It's horseshit that they're that they're that provincial with the information that they have, that the evidence they have, that they can't even release the names of the guys that they think were involved. Now, I don't think either one of them was involved, and I know there may be some disagreement here, but it's just that kind of thing that I just think that is really counterproductive. Honestly, what I think is going on here, and this pertains primarily to Anthony Amore, and I know who I've talked to Anthony Amore, so I know him, reasonably well. I also know somebody who knows him reasonably well. I think it's gotten personal. It's gotten personal. It's not business. In other words, I just get the feeling that he wants to be the guy that solves this case. And if he can't be the guy who solves it, no one's going to solve it. Again, very provincial. So it's very personal. He's handling it like a personal matter, not a business matter. And at the end of the day, if we want to recover these 13 pieces of art or parts thereof, you got to start playing ball with people. You got to run this stuff out to the public, kind of like a bank robbery. When a bank robbery occurs and you don't know who the bad guy is, the first thing the FBI does is get as much information out to the public as possible and let the public bring the suspect to them. That's exactly how they should have handled this case, but it's exactly what they didn't do. And here we are 35 years later, more than 35 years later, no bueno, have no idea where any of this stuff is.
I often hear the term or the phrase, "You're so deep in the forest that you can't see the trees." I kind of feel like this is what's going on with this case and even with the DB Cooper case. Do you agree?
I don't think the DB Cooper case, at least officially talking about the FBI, I don't think that's the case, because the FBI has shut that case down, and they've made it difficult in some other respects where they haven't given myself and some experts access to some of the evidence, which would have been nice. But in the case of Gardner, yeah, I think that's probably just another way of basically saying that they're so myopic in terms of the vision. They want their version to be right to exclusion of all others, whether or not it actually is right. And I think that's what's happened here. And again, I can think of many examples of this in the Gardner case. One is the search they did in 2016 at Bobby Gentile, a guy who they thought was involved or think was involved, that he had some of the art in his home in Connecticut. Well, they searched the house, dug the place up, whatever, in 2016, came away with nothing. The one thing that they did say is that they discovered a cavity basically in the floor of an out shed, and there was a large box there, and they believe that it contained the artwork at some time, but it's no longer there. That's just utter bullshit. That's just a cover your ass bullshit move. That's the FBI saying, well, we just showed up a minute too late. The artwork was here. We were right. It was here, but it's no longer there. Bullshit. Because at the end of the day, this artwork was cut out pretty roughly, may have been rolled up to some degree, but at a minimum, there's absolutely no doubting that there would have been paint chips. There would have been some forensic evidence left behind in that box indicating that, yeah, we've got the artwork was here before. We've heard nothing of that. As far as I know, they've never analyzed anything, looked for any evidence like that. They certainly haven't publicly said, hey, we found evidence that the artwork was here. There's nothing there to indicate that. So that's just a bullshit, cover up your ass kind of a statement, which doesn't serve anybody well. It doesn't do anybody any good, especially if you have people out there that think, oh, okay, so that must have been it. It must have been a Bobby, Gentile's place. Well, now that has nothing to do with, my guy, who I think it was. So therefore, you kind of put it out of sight and out of mind. So in the case of like a Brian McDevitt or someone like that, who has absolutely no relationship to Gentile, there may be somebody who knows information or thinks it was McDevitt and thinks, oh, well, I know McDevitt wasn't involved with Gentile or the mob or whatever. So therefore, there couldn't be any connection. And I just think that that's just unfortunate. But it's a self-created, it's an unforced error, basically, on the part of the FBI.
Sure. Rich, you're up.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing very well.
I have my own feeling about this, that Miles Connor, and I know he was in prison at the time, but his fingerprints are on this. This is his style as an art heister. I'd like to know, who do you think or do you have a suspect that is number one in your list?
I will say that in the case of the Gardner Museum heist, I believe that the art thief was a guy named Brian McDevitt, partnered with another guy named Steve Donahue, a buddy of his named Steve Donahue. I actually believe 100% that these were the guys behind it, which is a pretty strong statement given how I approach this stuff. I do not believe it was organized crime. And there are a number of reasons why I don't believe it was organized crime, not the least of which is the statute of limitations has long since expired. There's still a $10 million reward. You have guys who went to prison and died in prison who could have used it as a get out of jail free card, which is the reason most often given it was a get out of jail free card. Yet miraculously, amazingly, in 35 years, no one ever used it to get out of jail. No one ever ratted anybody out in this case, but every other case, people ratting other people out left and right. And certainly no one has availed themselves of any of that $10 million, which just doesn't pass the smell test. So I think that's, and moreover, there's just no evidence. There's no physical evidence tying them to any of this stuff at all. Now I know Miles, has a extended career of art robbery and art theft and stuff like that. So he's the kind of guy you would think that would have been involved. But of course, he was in prison, as you noted. He was in prison at the time that this thing occurred. And I just don't think it was involved. But I do think that he, like a lot of other people in the underworld, sort of, let's refer to it as a odd type of stolen valor. I think that a lot of times they act as if they know more than they do know. They sort of boast about being involved or knowing information that other people don't know to basically make themselves look more badass in the organized crime community. So I think there's a lot of that type of thing that has taken place here in the Gardner Museum world, because thus far, there's absolutely no evidence, not a shred of evidence that I'm aware of that ties them materially to any of this, other than basically a pretty good story from Miles O'Connor and a few other people.
I said this in one of your recent live streams on YouTube. If it doesn't make sense, it didn't happen. Lady by the name of Judge Judy said that. And it's absolutely true.
Well, in a case of D.B. Cooper, I say, if you can't explain the tie, he ain't the guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the tie is a piece of evidence. And I haven't come up with a clever line for Gardner, but there are some really big holes there. So it's like, well, then why didn't this happen? And I think that there are rational explanations for all of this, which we can get into. But I think it's very easy to understand what happened by whom, and ultimately what happened to the artwork as well. So
something that I'm really interested to hear about are your opinions on the readings of Stephanie Rabinowitz, her journals. Do you want to talk about who she is, how you got the journals, your conversations with her, and really how that impacted your theory, just like the story behind you and Stephanie's relationship?
Sure. First of all, the person as I noted, though, I believe was involved was a guy named Brian McDevitt. Brian, if he wasn't suspect number one, he was suspect number two. I mean, he was immediately on the FBI's radar when this thing occurred, March 18, 1990, the early morning hours of March 18, 1990, just after St. Patrick's Day, which of course is a pretty big deal in Boston, Massachusetts. Yep. So, Brian 10 years earlier had tried a similar museum robbery at the Hyde Museum in Glens Falls, New York, upstate New York, Glens Falls, New York. And he ended up getting caught. He and an accomplice ended up getting caught. And I won't go through all the details and everything else because that would take too much time. But the MO, the method of operation that he used to pull off that heist in 80 that didn't work is a blueprint for what happened at the Gardner Museum heist. Everything from handcuffs to tying people up to cutting the artwork out of the frames. The whole thing is exactly the same. It's very, very similar MO. So that, of course, when this thing took place in 1990, the FBI immediately thought, what about that McDevitt guy who tried something damn near exactly the same 10 years earlier, served jail time and ended up getting out, a handful of years earlier. So the FBI started surveilling Brian McDevitt. They actually pulled him in and interviewed him on multiple occasions because Brian lived in Boston. He lived on Beacon Hill, literally right across the street from the Capitol. And he said he didn't have anything to do with it. And, there you go. Now, interestingly, Brian at that time had a girlfriend named Stephanie Rabinowitz. And what makes Stephanie fascinating in this case is a couple of things. First of all, when the FBI asked Brian, where were you on March 18, 1990? Brian said, I was with my girlfriend, Stephanie. And so he basically used Stephanie as an alibi. Now, unbeknownst to the FBI for years, I think 14 years, unbeknownst to the FBI, Stephanie kept a daily journal. She kept a diary, day in and day out. She had done this since she was a little girl. And from the time she met Brian, which was July of 1989, till the time that basically she last saw Brian, which was July of 1992, she had written around 800 pages, she had 800 pages of diary, of journal that pertained to things that happened during that 3-year period of time. And a lot of information related to her dealings with Brian and her relationship with Brian, including events that occurred on the very night of the heist, again, March 18, 1990. Now, the FBI eventually, and I'm just kind of glossing over stuff here, but the FBI eventually decided to kind of like re-look into Brian, and this happened in 1992. So a couple years after the heist had taken place, they still didn't know what was going on. The New York Times wrote an extensive piece about Brian McDevitt and his prospective involvement in this thing, and that got picked up by the LA Times, and then that got picked up by the Boston Globe, and the FBI started digging into Brian at the same time. And Brian was living in LA at the time. This is 1992. He moved to LA 6 weeks after the heist took place. And Stephanie was also living in LA at the time. Now, they weren't dating, and Stephanie had moved there just coincidentally, separately, but they still kept in contact occasionally in LA. And they interviewed Stephanie. The FBI actually interviewed Stephanie for the first time in 1992. And again, remember, Stephanie was given up as an alibi for Brian at this time. And so when they interviewed Stephanie, Stephanie told them, I don't know that she could recall exactly what had happened in 1990 necessarily, but Brian, preceding the FBI interviewing Stephanie, who knew that the FBI was hot on his trail, had tried on 2 occasions to get Stephanie to serve as an alibi for him. In other words, Brian wanted her to tell the FBI, oh yeah, Brian was with me on that night on 2 occasions before, but Stephanie said she wouldn't do it. And I guess at that point, she must have realized that she wasn't actually with Brian on the 18th. And the reason why she knew that is because in her diary on that date, it shows that Brian said that he was going to be in New York City for a Writers Guild Award. So that weekend, Brian was gone. Brian was apparently in New York City. Now, they later ascertained that the Writers Guild Award didn't take place in March of 1990. It took place a month later. So that was a lie that Brian had told Stephanie. But Stephanie had it written contemporaneously that, Brian wasn't there. And it's important to know, Stephanie knew nothing of Brian's true background. Brian was a con man, had lied to her about what he was doing for a job and everything else. But amazingly, the FBI didn't realize that Stephanie had journals, Fast forward to 2004, 14 years after the thing took place, the FBI flew to Seattle because Stephanie was now living in Seattle in 2014, and they interviewed her again about Brian McDevitt and his prospective involvement. And it was at that point that they realized Stephanie had these journals. And Stephanie, you would think that the FBI would have said, well, can we take the journals, photocopy off the 800 pages you have, and then we'll just give you the journals back. And then they have all this information of what actually took place during that time. They didn't do that. They basically sort of cut a corner here and said, ask Stephanie to kind of like send them some excerpts of portions of the diaries. So she did. She sent about a dozen excerpts. She faxed a copy of these things in it was actually May 4th of 2004, and I know that it was faxed to Jeff Kelly, the FBI in Boston, and I've actually seen the fax. So I know what information the FBI had. But part of it was the fact that there's the excerpt related to the date of the heist where Brian wasn't there. So at that point, the FBI knew for sure that Brian had lied. Brian had perjured himself going all the way back to 1990 by virtue of serving up Stephanie as an alibi, saying that they were together. Moreover, apparently it didn't concern anybody in 1992 when Brian had tried to shake her down twice in LA to also be an alibi, but she said, no, I'm not going to lie to the FBI. But for some reason, the FBI just never acted on it. They never did anything with it. Well, I ended up coming into contact with Stephanie. Gosh, it had to be, I don't know, maybe 2022 or 2021, something like that. I ended up, as I was investigating the case, I came across Stephanie, was living in Scottsdale, Arizona at the time, and Stephanie was also, by coincidence, happened to live in the same area. So I got to know Stephanie quite well, and I still know her quite well. And so we've talked extensively about this, but one thing that she did is she actually gave me her journals. So I took the time to read the 800 pages of journal and take notes and sort of absorb it and talk to her about it. And there is a lot of stuff in there, that honestly, the FBI should know, but they don't know because they cut corners and didn't learn about it. They didn't dig into it. And I think that the journals tell a story, or at least tell a significant part of the story of what actually happened at the time of the heist and ultimately what happened to the artwork. Unbeknownst to Stephanie, because it's important to remember, Stephanie knew nothing of this, nothing. She's just keeping records, doing the diary, stuff like that. It's just years later when you look at it, we're like, wow, that's interesting. So, it's just a fascinating read. I think she ought to print those things and publish a book, to be honest with you.
That would make a really good book. Hey, I'd buy it. I'd buy it. Yeah. If you got photocopies of them, I'd love to have them. Rich, what do you got? You got anything?
Yeah. What do you think about Rick Abath? Do you think he had anything to do with it? Scapegoat, or so many of these art heists have an inside connection some way. Do you think he might have been an inside connection to Brian McDivitt?
Absolutely. I do believe Rick Abath was involved. Now, I don't think he was some sort of like kingpin crime genius. I just think he was a guy that just got in over his head, basically, and somehow got strong-armed or muscled into assisting, and that's what happened. So I'm convinced of that. Part of the reason why is because one of the pieces that's missing, Chez Tortoni, or Manet, called the Chez Tortoni, was stolen from the first floor Blue Room. And there were motion detectors that recorded the movements of the thieves, the full 81 minutes that they were in the museum that night, the two thieves. And Rick Abath was the only person, according to the motion detector evidence, that was in that room. So the only person that could have taken the Chez Tortoni was Rick Abath. Moreover, if you follow the movements of Rick, he went to the roof shortly thereafter for less than a minute. Then he went down to the Dutch room. Then he ended up coming down to the security desk area. And that's when his partner, Randy Hestand, took over and started his rounds. And it's shortly after Randy started his rounds that Rick Abath, for some odd reason, opened the door momentarily, the door to the outside, basically, from the security area, which I believe was a signal, as well as I think him going on the roof was a signal, which I can get into. But and it was within, I think it was 5 or 10 minutes later that the thieves actually were buzzed in by Rick Abath, who thought they were Boston police officers, apparently. But Rick's fingerprints, and Rick's passed away, so he's not in a position to defend himself, and I want to be clear about that. So this is just my opinion, but I think it's pretty compelling evidence. Rick passed away a little over a year ago, as I recall. But his fingerprints are all over this thing. I think that he was involved, and again, I think it was one of those situations where he just got kind of like, kind of blackmailed into it somehow, or something like that, kind of strong armed into it. So I think he was involved. Now, on the other hand, the other guy, Randy Hestan, absolutely no doubt he had nothing to do with this. And it's a very interesting thing to consider when, the two, Rick and Randy, were taken downstairs. They were bound and taped up and taken downstairs and put in different parts of the museum basement while the museum was being robbed. Now, Rick, again, I think he was involved, so nothing he says matters, in my opinion. Randy, on the other hand, I'm convinced wasn't involved. Randy, when he was actually presented with pictures of Brian McDevitt, and I guess I had an opportunity to hear Brian McDevitt speak as well, because they had obviously interviewed him, the FBI had interviewed him. He said that he was 90% certain, I think he said 90 to 95% certain, that Brian McDevitt was the guy who actually tied him up and bound him up in the basement. This is a first-hand witness who said he is convinced with the 90 to 95% certainty that Brian McDevitt was one of the thieves, was one of the guys. Hard to, I don't know how you get past that, yet the authorities for some reason have. I don't know, they just swept it aside or what have you.
You had mentioned the Shea Tortoni.
Yes.
And I've seen in other podcast, YouTube productions that you've done, that you have a hunch that the Shea Tortoni at that time, now granted, this was probably 2 years ago that this video was published. So I'm curious how you believe it's changed your theory, but you said that there's a possibility that the Shea Tortoni might still be in Boston. At that time, you had mentioned that. It was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, I thought, as I recall, I thought it was possible, because I think that the Shea Tortoni may have been originally sort of presented as payment to Rick Abbott for his efforts. So I think the Tortoni was kind of segregated from the rest of the artwork in a way.
Why do you think that?
Well, because it was segregated, because it was separate. It was in the blue room, and it appears that and the thieves didn't go into the blue room. And then also the frame ended up on the frame for the artwork was cut out. The painting was cut out, and the frame for that ended up on the security director's chair, kind of as an FU. And there was a little bit of a bad blood between the security supervisor and Rick Abbott, who was quitting his job, by the way, at the time this happened. So there's something unique about that. But I think that what happened is that he took the Shea Tortoni and he walked up to the roof. And again, this did happen. He did walk up onto the roof. And I think he signaled to Brian McDevitt and a guy named Steve Donahue that were in a car on the opposite side of the museum, that basically this thing is going to be going down here pretty soon. In the interim, Rick Abbott goes down to the Dutch room and then ultimately ends up in a security desk. At that time, I believe Brian McDevitt and Steve Donahue go to the other side of the museum, near the entry of the museum, and park the car and wait for the second signal that it's game on. That occurred when, of course, Randy Hestan, the other security guard, took over and started doing his rounds. And then, of course, Rick Abbott opened the door briefly to sort of send that final signal, and that was it. Then everything was underway. So I think I'm now, having said that, to answer your original question here, just because I think that piece was primarily the payment, if you will, it seems like likely Rick Abbott's payment. I've theorized that maybe it got separated at some point. Maybe Rick actually collected it and it was somewhere else. It was sort of somewhere else in the New England area, because Randy, or rather Rick, lived in New England. He didn't move anywhere. I mean, he ended up in Vermont. I believe it was Vermont or New Hampshire. I think it was Vermont. But either way, so that's what I thought. Now, in retrospect, as I've looked at it more closely over the last couple of years, I think Rick just got basically, I think he got taken. In other words, I don't think he got anything. I don't think he got his hands on any of that artwork or anything at all. I think that's the truth of the matter. He got just totally taken advantage of, strong armed, and probably didn't want to have a damn thing to do with it after the whole thing went down, because obviously this was a huge deal. I mean, immediately just blew up internationally.
Oh, I'm
And
sure you get $200 million just vanishing overnight, under the stealth of darkness. That's going to make national headlines, world headlines at that point. Speaking of world headlines, do you think that this is in some private collector's curio cabinet or display in Russia, in Moldova, or Egypt, some or like a Sikh or something like Sheikh? I'm sorry. Where do you think these paintings are?
well, I believe that, first of all, I want to say, and this is kind of stepping back a little bit. In 1992, the last time that Stephanie saw Brian was at a Ren and Stimpy closing party in LA, and it was July 25th, 1992. Stephanie was in LA. She worked on the Ren and Stimpy show, and they were closing up shop. They're ending the show. And at that party, Brian just showed up. And Brian, at that time, actually confessed to Stephanie that he had stolen the artwork. So he confessed for the first time to her, apparently, that he had stolen the artwork. And he said that he did sell it. He said he did sell it to some guy. The name was actually given to Stephanie, but Stephanie cannot remember the name. And Brian was basically wanting Stephanie to leave the United States with him, to leave the country, basically. She, of course, refused. I think that that's half true and half bullshit. I don't believe that it was stolen for somebody's collection. I don't think he was getting paid or anything of that nature. What I do believe happened is that Brian's good friend, Steve Donahue, lived in Jamaica. Brian traveled to Jamaica pretty regularly. In fact, Brian and Stephanie both had been to Jamaica December of 1989, so just 4 months before the heist. And I won't go into the details of everything that transpired in Jamaica, but Jamaica, famously, they had a criminal ring there, I guess is how I'll put it. And how this ties in with Gardner is in this way. In 1989, there was $8 million worth of artwork stolen at the Batona Museum in Italy that disappeared. It ended up being discovered in 1990 that it was in Jamaica. It was being held in Jamaica. Now, it was being held by a group of people who, for lack of a better term, were kind of escrow agents in the international drug trade. This sounds fantastical, but this is actually the truth. The artwork was actually used, the Batona Museum artwork that was ripped off in 89 or 87. It was 87, I think I said 89. That was used as collateral for a large shipment, a large drug shipment. So these guys in Jamaica were kind of the escrow agents, basically, for lack of a better term, holding the collateral. Well, they got busted. They got busted literally like 35 days after the Gardner Museum heist. It was literally a month later that the whole thing got busted. People got arrested. The artwork was recovered, and it all just kind of blew up. I believe that Brian and his buddy Steve Donahue had connections with these bad guys in Jamaica. And I believe that Brian and Steve Donahue intended to do the same thing. I think they intended to basically get into the international drug trade, servicing the Los Angeles area. And I believe that their idea was to steal a bunch of artwork, hand it off to the escrow agents as collateral to take a shipment to start dealing in the LA area. But things went sideways because their escrow agent was suddenly out of business a month later. It was just bad timing, basically, for Brian. So I think he was stuck with this, holding this stuff. I think they were stuck holding this stuff and didn't know what to do with it. Now, ultimately, and I'm kind of fast forwarding because there's evidence to this, and there are people that I've talked to that knew Brian and Ellie at this point and everything else. But I think it's very clear that what ended up happening is when the gig was up, when it all kind of blew up, his seller was gone, or his buyer was basically gone, or the escrow agent was gone. Plus, the FBI is breathing down his neck at the same time, 1992, or shortly thereafter, before then. I believe that Brian ultimately destroyed the artwork, burned the artwork in a Hollywood Hills home that he was renting at a large rock fireplace. I believe that all of the artwork, well, the 11 sketches and paintings were all burned in there. Now, the two bronze pieces, the Eagle Finial and the Chinese Coup, these are bronze. They're not getting burned in the fireplace. They're still out there somewhere. I don't know if they're chucked in the ocean or buried in the yard somewhere or what have you. They're still out there. But as far as the other artwork is concerned, I'm absolutely convinced that it was destroyed. And that is part of the reason why nobody, not Brian or Steve or anybody, has ever come forward and provided any kind of information. Again, long after the statute of limitations expired, why nobody's provided any information to collect any of that reward, because there's no artwork to come up with to cough up. I just think it's gone.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That Isabella's spinning in her grave as we speak about this right now. You had done some, I guess, chemical research on the ashes of the fire pit. I have a couple of pictures that you've posted so I can display them of the ash. That's just ash, and then the vinyl type adhesive that was discovered in, I guess, like the ash storage. What would you call that? Like the storage container? What would you even call that? I don't know.
Well, it's sort of like an ash chamber is what it is.
Okay.
But so I'll tell you, like, this is kind of interesting. So this is just kind of how I am. Like, I was in LA on some other separate business actually, and I knew Brian's address. I knew where he had lived before. Now, Brian has passed away. He died in 2004, so he's no longer around. But so I was in LA, and I just decided that I'm just going to go to this house in LA, and I'm just going to knock on the door and introduce myself. So I literally show up at these people's door, knock on the door, and they answered the door, and I said, "Hi, my name's Eric Ulis. You're not going to believe this story, but here we go." And it's just like, I believe that he was involved with the Gardner Museum heist and all this. And as fate would have it, it was a young married couple. And the wife, gosh, I think at the time I met her, she had to be somewhere in her late 20s or 30s, something like that. Husband about the same age. But as fate would have it, she was from Boston. So she knew of the story, and like they're like dumbfounded. I'm like, yeah, this place was, the place where Brian McDevitt lived, and I think the artwork was here, and all this other kind of stuff. So they actually let me in, and I talked with them for a while, and then I came back at a later date with Stephanie Rabinowitz, who had been to the house. Stephanie had actually visited Brian at that house when they lived there in '92, and what I was particularly interested in was the fireplace, because I believe that the artwork was burned there, because Brian, who passed himself as a screenwriter, basically came up with a story. What am I trying to say? A screenwriter, a script. Yeah, there we go. Script slipped on mine. He came up with a script that essentially talked about art thieves who ripped off the artwork. They kind of were shocked that they were successful. They were in over their heads. And ultimately, they had to burn the stuff in a cave, which the whole script, I think, is basically a telling of what basically happened at the Gardner Museum heist. So I started. One thing I wanted to do was I wanted to look into the fireplace to see if maybe by chance there was still some remnants of some of the debris or what have you in the fireplace from burning the artwork there. So of course, I asked the homeowners. I said, "Have you ever cleaned the chimney chute or chimney in the fireplace?" And they said, "Yes, we have." But he said, however, there is this one chamber. There's this ash chamber that's inaccessible because a natural gas line had been pulled in sometime later. There's this ash chamber that may still have some ash in there. And what the ash chamber basically was is you have the big fireplace, and in the back bottom floor of the fireplace, there's this metal flap that you open up, and you would sweep all the ash into that hole in the back of the fireplace, and it would fall down into a chamber. And then outside on the back of the house, you could open a metal door, and you could just take all the ash and take it and throw it away. So you don't have to traipse it through the house, basically. So as it is, so I went there and I opened up, I pried open the ash chamber, and sure enough, the ash chamber was full of ash and other very odd debris, this kind of like vinyl kind of stuff. I don't know how to describe it. It's very odd. I've got some pictures, which I'm sure you can put up there.
Sure.
But my immediate thought was this could actually be remnants of the artwork, and this vinyl stuff could have been something that was applied to, was put on the front of the artwork to cover it up or conceal it or what have you. But one way or the other, I'm like, how does this stuff end up here? Like, people burn wood in a fireplace. What is this vinyl stuff? What is all this crap in here? So I pulled it out and I had it analyzed by a guy named Tom Kay, who's he's a well-known scientist guy who's actually done a lot on the D.B. Cooper case. So of course, I know Tom very well. And I said, hey, Tom, I got to send you some of this stuff, take a look at it. So he did analyze it with an electron microscope that he has. Now, it's not like super high, like state-of-the-art kind of analysis, but it's pretty thorough. As far as the vinyl stuff, yeah, that's just kind of like a vinyl. It's like a plastic kind of vinyl, carbon type of thing. We don't know what it's used for. It's your guess is as good as mine. It appears to be, from what I can tell, it appears to be something that was maybe had an adhesive or stickiness on one side, but not on the other. Maybe, for example, if you're like transporting a mirror, something delicate like that, you could apply this to the mirror. That would keep the mirror kind of pretty well protected from getting scratched or broken or anything else. Then you just peel it off when you arrive at your destination. So it appears to be something like that. So I thought maybe perhaps they use it to cover up the artwork. But the ash itself was basically inconclusive. There'd have to be a much more comprehensive analysis done of the ash, because in particular, what I was looking for was lead and mercury, because they used a paint that had lead back then, at the time this Rembrandt was painting and so forth. Also, they used a thing called cinnabar, an element, it's a concoction called cinnabar, an element basically called cinnabar. And a cinnabar has mercury in it. So even if you burn this stuff up in a fireplace, you should still have traces of mercury and lead, which are metals, of course, aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And that's my whole idea, was to try to see if there was any lead or mercury in there, because if there is, one has to ask, well, what is mercury and lead doing in the ash in the fireplace? That it would seem to be a pretty strong indication that artwork had been burned there in the past, even though at this point it's 30 years earlier. But thus far, it's inconclusive. I'd love to partner with a production house in LA and actually do a comprehensive documentary on this and actually really go in and test this stuff hardcore level.
Do you still have it? The ash? Do you still have
it? I do.
That's
and
cool.
I still have, and of course I still know the homeowners and everything else. And I talked to them about going back again and really kind of taking through, because I took only a portion of the ash out. I didn't take all of it out. So, but yeah, I do still have it. And, it's something that would be terrific to get analyzed by Macron Labs or somebody like that, to see what they could come up with, to see if we could come up with anything. At the end of the day, I don't know that we would come up with a fragment, an unburned fragment. That would be terrific if it came up with an unburned fragment.
Could you
that's
imagine?
Clearly like a piece of canvas or something. And who knows, maybe that's there. I don't know. But, I'm kind of thinking more in terms of, there's probably some sort of accelerant thrown on it, was all burned up, and there you go. But I'm convinced that stuff was destroyed. And it was destroyed probably not too long after the heist took place in 1990, just within a month or a few months after the heist took place, because of everything that went down in Jamaica and the FBI breathing down Bryant's neck and interviewing people and everything else. And I think, sadly, that's what happened. I just don't think we're ever going to see any of that stuff again. Now, the Chinese coup and the bronze finial notwithstanding, it is possible that those are discovered, because they should still be out there somewhere, but probably somewhere off the coast of LA or something in the Pacific Ocean or a lake or something like that.
Yeah, awful. I would love to see these paintings resurface. I'd love to see them end up in an episode of Storage Wars or something. They're just in some storage unit. One of them forgot to pay it. Boom, they're there. But that's just a dream world. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Rich, what do you got? You got anything?
No, I don't have anything. I wanted to thank Eric for being with us today. This has really been enlightening, and thank you again.
Yeah, Eric.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my theory isn't more optimistic, but I think it's the truth. I think that's what happened. I'm convinced that's what happened. There's some version very close to that, and like I said, from my perspective, it would be nice if the FBI, because this is still an open case in Boston, it would be nice if the FBI took this a little bit more seriously, and they actually looked at the ash and the fireplace and talked to some of the people that I've talked to. I know they have talked to some of them, and some of this information they have, but I think that it would be nice if they would be willing to play ball and do that. But I have a feeling that, you know, they put themselves out there publicly in 2013 saying they know what happened. They think that the artwork ended up in Philadelphia and was, you know, shipped off somewhere else. I mean, it basically bragged about that being the story. So I don't know how you unring the bell there on that one without basically without taking some egg on your face. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I don't hold a hell of a lot of hope. I don't have a lot of faith in the FBI or Anthony Morey, for that matter, of anybody sort of backtracking on that to any large degree. So that, I think, is part of the reason why it's still a mystery today, and why they're still basically pushing this narrative that the artwork is probably still out there somewhere, just hanging on someone's wall in, you know, Abu Dhabi or some such place, and that, you know, we'll figure it out someday. But I don't think so. So,
well, Eric, I'll be seeing you on September 16th or 17th.
17th, yes. Yeah.
You and I are or at least I'm going to be joining you on a expedition around Tina Bar. If you haven't watched the DB Cooper case, the video that Rich and I did, we've done 2 episodes on it. I highly suggest that you watch it and follow up those videos with Eric's channel. Those channel links will be down below in the description and pinned comments, so very easy just to get there. But I'm going to be joining Eric on an expedition around Tina Bar, and we're going to be trying to find out any new information in the realm of artifacts. I guess the attaché case that was possibly abandoned there, and the parachute, or at least the skeleton of it. Yeah. So
I think the parachutes are still there. The parachutes are out there. There's no doubt about that in my mind. So it'd be nice to find those parachutes, if we can actually find them. And I think they're very, very close to where a portion of his ransom was found in 1980. Again, an area that's never been searched by the FBI. So we're going to go out there and do it ourselves, and hopefully find something. If we don't find it on the 17th, then perhaps it's sometime thereafter, because I plan on continuing the search. Sure. In that area extensively, and getting to the bottom of that as well. So,
well, I personally can't wait to go out there. I've never been out to Oregon, so I'll be going out there for a first.
Yeah, well, we'll actually be in Washington State. Tina Bar is actually just over the border in Washington State.
Yeah, I'm flying into Portland, and then I have a hotel that's like 20 minutes away. It's kind of like just north a little bit. Over that river area,
the Columbia River. Yeah. Portland, Oregon is right on the border of Oregon and Washington. In fact, the greater Portland area straddles again Washington State and Oregon. Just north of the Columbia River, sort of the northern suburbs of greater Portland, is Vancouver, Washington. And it's in Vancouver, Washington, along the Columbia River, where we'll be searching. So, yeah.
Yep. I'll be running cameras. I'm going to be bringing Canon with me, and a couple GoPros, and some microphones. I'd love to, just kind of document or create like a mini documentary for the YouTube channel. So if you guys are watching and interested in that, please be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to subscribe so that you guys can see that episode. I can't wait to do it. I've never done something like that on this channel. Rich and I were talking earlier today about going to the Gardner Museum, but I got to make a couple phone calls, make sure that they allow cameras in there and that we can film. But if you're ever back in Boston, I know you're in Arizona right now, but if you'll be back in Rhode Island, you're absolutely welcome to join us. I'd love to have you come along. That'd be a really good time.
Well, let me know when, if you guys do that. I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually relocating to Seattle from Rhode Island. And the reason why is because I'm really diving in deep on the Cooper investigation in particular. But I've been to the Gardner Museum, but I'd love to travel back there and with you guys. And I think they are kind of touchy about cameras on the inside, but there's certainly cameras, could film the outside, and we could see the part of the roof where Rick Abath was, because he went to the roof and looked out there. And then obviously we can go on the other side of the museum and see the door where the thieves entered and all that. Now it's been modified somewhat, it's changed somewhat, but certainly we can also walk into museum itself, which hasn't changed. It's exactly the same per the wishes of Isabella Stewart herself.
Right.
That it remained unchanged. So yeah, you've got the empty frames there with the pieces of art missing. It's a pretty spectacular thing to witness and see. And to imagine that right here, this is literally a crime scene that we're sitting in. The Dutch Room is a crime scene, albeit 35 years earlier, but the evidence is still clearly there with the empty frames and everything. But it's a terrific place to see. And I encourage anybody in New England to check it out, not just for the empty frames, but for the rest of the artwork. I mean, there's Titian, there's all kinds of stuff, just amazing, just chock full of all kinds of amazing artwork and things. And it's a gem there in the Boston area. And it's a shame that these pieces are gone. And I'd love to be the guy, as well as a lot of other people, I'm sure, to recover it. I know that they would love to see that, but
Yep.
at least as far as, I'm concerned, I'm convinced that that'll never happen. So.
Yeah. Well, Eric, I want to thank you for coming on to the show today, taking the time out of your morning to Zoom in with us. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm looking forward to traveling out there and meeting you in person and doing this excursion over by
That's right. We're going to grab that beer too.
Yes, absolutely. I have a lot more questions. So I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but for time's sake.
I got you. Understand, gentlemen. So.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much, Eric, and good luck on your search on Tina Bar.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Cheers, guys. You bet.
Cheers.
Bye. You bet.
So what do we think, Rich?
Well, that's a lot of information, isn't it?
It's pretty interesting, isn't it?
It is. And I'm sure that's not what a lot of people wanted to hear.
Yeah, no, it's
The
heartbreaking.
conclusion that Eric gave us today, which is kind of substantiated, is sad news for a lot of people, because I think in our hearts,
we want to see this stuff returned.
Exactly.
We want to see someone in Poland get busted, and then this stuff just appears.
Yes. All of a sudden, as you said, somebody opens up a locker somewhere and
boom,
there
it
they
is,
are.
Pristine and
Under
new frames,
somebody's-
covered
in between somebody's mattresses for 35 years.
Yeah.
But according to what Eric's, and he's done some serious research on site, and what he's presented is certainly a thought that maybe this material, maybe these paintings, these masterpieces will never be seen again.
Sure.
And that's a sad story, but it's a distinct possibility. And I want to thank you for having me over again and doing another one. We'll have to think about what we're going to do from here on.
For next, yeah. Definitely throw your comments down below if you have any suggestions for us. Right now, we don't have anything coming up next.
Yeah,
so
we have
need
had a
to-
couple people mention, one mentioned the molasses flood of Boston, which is kind of interesting. And you and I talked about the Great Plymouth Mail Truck robbery,
That's an interesting one,
which
yeah.
interestingly has some connections, even though it's 30 years in between that and the Gardner Museum. Dressed like police.
Yeah,
Never solved.
right.
4 people indicted, 1 disappeared, and the other 3 were acquitted.
Actually, I got one. How about this? The Zodiac Killer.
Ooh.
Do you know anything about that one?
I do. It's a little bit creepy.
It's creepy.
It's more than creepy.
Yeah,
It's cryptic.
it is cryptic. Yeah, maybe some of our viewers can help crack the codes with ChatGPT 5.0.
Yes, exactly. Well, again, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Keep those comments coming and suggestions. If you have any questions, please ask them, and we'll do our best to answer.
Please drop your comments down below. If you want to super chat this episode, all the super chats will be getting donated to the victims' families and the funeral costs for the Minneapolis school shooting that happened just last week or so. My heart goes out to all the families. So if you have any super chats, throw them down in the comments below, and all that stuff will get donated. And the receipts essentially will be on my Instagram. and they will be on my X account as well. All the links will be down in the description below. Eric's links to his website, where you can read about his investigations, stay updated, and his YouTube channel where he does lives like this, and his own videos will all be down in the description below, as well as David's paintings that I have behind us. His links will be in the description. So support the show and just kind of check out and see what's going on with everybody around.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
See you next time.
Have a good one.